All right, well, thank you very much, Melissa, for that description of the Master of Science in Human Genetics and Genetic Counseling. I will say I've been involved in the development of that program as well, and we hope we've put together a really exciting curriculum for all of our future students. And the great thing about it is that we were putting this curriculum together already with the insight that we would have this second partner program. And that's the program I'm going to talk to you about right now, which is our Master of Science in Human Genetics and Genomic Data Analytics. Just because that's a mouthful, I'll probably just call it MSGDA from here on out. But as you have been told, there is this huge need in the industry to meet the analysis backlog that has started to accumulate because there are not enough people trained to do genomics to meet all of the demand for testing that's being done, whether it's testing that's been ordered by a clinician or testing that consumers, just you and I, and maybe someone you know, have sought out because they heard a commercial on the radio. I hear now that it's even growing amongst pets. People are paying to sequence their dogs, and they're doing genomics on dogs now, so that could be an even bigger market. But there's this huge desire in the community to have access to genomic information. And that access only exists if someone can help interpret all those letters on the screen. And Dr. Shaw started today by mentioning that there is now a $1,000 genome being offered by several companies. What no one tells you after that number is that just gets you the letters to display on the screen of a computer. They don't talk about the $5,000 worth of analysis to make any sense whatsoever about what that sequence means. There still needs to be a scientist with training in genetics and genomics to look at that data, make a informed conclusion, and then pass that along to a health professional who could do something about it. And we call that the clinically actionable result. This gap is just getting wider as people hear about it more, that it's advertised. And so the demand, I know that some people have thrown out this number that the industry is growing by 26%. I think that's a gross underestimate of what's going to happen if there were enough people to do this work. And so once we were designing the genetic counseling program, designing a second partnership program to meet that need on the analytics side for roles that weren't necessarily patient-facing, so the counseling aspect, which the genetic counselors are going to spend a lot of time learning how to be an effective communicator when you're sitting with a patient or talking with a patient on the phone. And I'm not minimizing that in any way. That is an art and a skill all on its own. But for a lot of genetic counselors, they never do that skill again because they go straight to one of these industry jobs doing data analytics. And so we thought, how about we could train people to do that job, not take one degree and take that genetic counselor out of the market when there's such a demand for genetic counselors to actually meet with patients. Let's start educating some people to do this job of variant curation and data analytics that is so important in the industry right now. And so with that, we kind of started with a blank sheet of paper. How would we design a training program to get people ready to go in the genomics industry in 2 years? And so we started from science because we are an institution of higher learning. And so the genetics coursework is going to be pretty much the same between both programs. You have to have a really strong foundation in genetics to be able to make any sort of decision that might be used to treat a patient. The other thing we're going to focus on is human genomics. My personal research is focused on genomics, and so it's a different way of thinking about how genetics works when you take a complete genomics perspective. That is where the field is going. But to start from scratch with this genomics focus, I think is really important to our program, that it's not that we're adding on one class in genomics now. It's that every class we've set up has been designed from this genomics perspective. And the last aspect that really makes our program unique is the fact that we're at KGI. And KGI has had this applied life science program for 20 years now, really focused on educating students to go work in the biotech industry, as opposed to a lot of other institutions that educate students to go be a professor, even though 99% of them would never go and be a professor. Most people who graduate with jobs in biology are not going to work in academic research. And so having a program designed to meet the needs that industry wants. So there are so many advisors that work with KGI that we're talking to the executives and the decision makers and the managers at all of these biotech companies, and they help inform us what skills we need to be training our students with so they can get into a job and hit the ground running and don't have to be retrained in how it works in a industry site as opposed to an academic site. And so the courses that are already offered in the School of Applied Life Sciences that are applicable to analytics are going to be leveraged to round out that educational experience. The other exciting feature about having it at KGI is you'll be taking classes with people who are going to be the genetic counselors living in California. And you're going to be taking classes with people that are going to work for the biotech companies in California. So you're already going to start building your network with genetic counselors and with life sciences that are going to go out into the field together. And so already when you graduate, you'll have made connections with people on both sides of your career path, not just with the professors, but also with your co-students. And so as a cohort, you can be moving on together and already have those relationships. So when you have a question about something and you need to talk to a genetic counselor, you already know 12 people that are genetic counselors because they graduated with you. We are also making a strong push that all of the education will be a balance between foundational science, which you need, and the practical knowledge of how to do these analytics type pipelines. So a lot of hands-on work, a lot of working with data sets, manipulating them, getting results, sharing them with clinical lab directors so they can give feedback. If you were their employee, would this be acceptable or not? And we've heard from our advisory board how important it is to get that hands-on experience doing the exact kind of analysis pipelines or modules that you would do once you are working in that site. And all of that hopefully will add up to something usable to another stakeholder, whether you're going to be writing a report that's then forwarded to a genetic counselor that gets explained to a patient, or you're going to forward that to a doctor who ordered a test, or you could be forwarding it to the company to maybe say, you know, this panel that we've been ordering has not been finding variants as efficiently as this other panel, so maybe we want to change how we design our tests so we can get better data. All of these roles will involve an analyst who's doing the work that will then inform other people. So I've heard some people say they're really interested in genomics, but they don't want to just stare at a computer all day. And I really want to emphasize here that people with this analyst degree, yes, you will have to look at a computer, but the important point about being an analyst is that you then explain that to others. So you might be the person doing the actual work of trying to find which variant or what mutation might be responsible for disease. But if you never talk to anyone about that, then you might as well have not done it. It's all about working in a dynamic team, and no matter what setting you end up in, whether you're in a genetic counseling practice, or you're working for one of these large testing companies, or you're working in a clinical lab at a hospital, you're going to be working as part of a team and playing the role of interpretation and having a discussion and working alongside the people who are seeing the patients to make a difference in people's lives. So you might not ever meet that patient because of privacy rules. You might just have a case number, but you know that for each file you're looking at, it does represent a real person who you're trying to help. So on a day-to-day basis, what would an analyst do? Well, the biggest need in the industry right now is to interpret DNA variants. And as we sequence more people, we know that we have a lot of variation that we don't share with anyone else. So how do you know if you do a sequencing reaction, sequence someone's whole genome, does anyone know about how many unique variants you're going to find. If you said about 10,000, you're in the right ballpark. So which one of those is causing the disease that made them get this test? Well, someone's going to have to sift through that to figure out what's going on. Of course, we use a lot of bioinformatic tools to do this, but it still is a puzzle. So you run different algorithms and you try to figure out which hypothesis makes the most sense, what we have the most data for, and put together lots of different pieces of data to solve the problem in the best way that you can. Again, you have to then present this knowledge to either a medical director or a genetic counselor. And so one of the things we're really going to focus on is how to translate knowledge and basically write and explain this data in a way that doesn't just make sense to another analyst, but might make sense to someone who does not have as strong a background in genomics or does not have a strong background in bioinformatics. Once we started developing this program, we talked to some people at some biotech companies around here, and they got very excited because they need analysts in the drug development side. So we tend to think of genomics on a person-to-person scale, but as we develop new drugs that are targeted towards particular mutations, when you set up a clinical trial, you have to appropriately identify who should be a case and who should be a control, and do you have enough genetic variation represented in your sample of your clinical trial to really make a conclusion. And so this is going to be an even bigger emphasis going forward, as most of the drugs that are developed are these next generation type drugs. At the development stage, they're going to need people to help analyze the data from these clinical trials and just the data from the patients to make sure they're interpreting the results correctly. So for those of you who are interested, maybe you never even thought about being a data analyst and you just were on this webinar to hear about genetic counseling, I would suggest you look at some of these job titles that are out there. The most common would be clinical variant curator or clinical variant scientist, but because this field is so new, there's lots of different ways that these jobs are titled. So these are just two job ads that I found in the last couple months. One is working at the Jackson Laboratory, which is a very large academic and industry partnership site. And they are looking for a clinical genomic scientist to do a lot of these same tasks I just talked about. Or on the other side, we have one at a company that is looking for someone to do variant curation. And this is a smaller company that is involved in just wellness optimization. In order to make our program unique and make all of our graduates stand out, we have a few signature courses. These are mostly in the second year, but the first one I'll talk about is the Human Genomics Next Generation Sequencing Lab. And next generation sequencing is now the underpinning of pretty much everything that happens in biology or medicine. But because it has now become so cheap at the industrial scale, I'm sure none of you have ever used a sequencer the way that they're used in the industry, unless you work at a testing company. No, it's very hard to actually get a sequencer in an undergraduate biology lab these days. They're just too expensive and it's not practical. So now everyone just ships off their samples, but they're not going off into this black hole. It's important if you're going to analyze sequencing data that you really understand how it goes from the test tube all the way to the computer screen. So we are going to do a semester-long lab that goes with the human genetics course, where we are going to sequence 2 or 3 full human genomes and do the analysis. We'll also do an RNA sequencing transcriptome study, just so we can get some hands-on practical experience seeing what could go right, what could go wrong, what kind of errors do we get, and let you as students really work through a sequencing project from start to finish. When you get into a role in a industry site, you might never do it again. because there would be CLIA laboratory technicians who actually do the sequencing. But I always think you really understand the data better if you know how it was generated. And you can know if there was some problem with the data to make you go back to the testing side and say, you know, I think the sample needs to be rerun. The next course is a specific course with the title of DNA sequencing and variant analysis. A lot of our program was sort of based on this is the specialty, but we wanted to make sure that everyone's transcript would say the magic words of sequencing and variant analysis. And so there will be one class that's just dedicated 100% to all of the ins and outs of doing good variant analysis. And this is something that most genetic counseling or just a regular master's in human genetics might spend a couple of weeks on. Well, we're going to spend an entire semester really getting into the nitty-gritty of how you do this and what is going to make a report that can be useful to a doctor or genetic counselor. We'll also do some functional genomics, which is an emerging field. This is more towards people who might end up on the research side, but it is like RNA sequencing, is something that might start appearing more in the clinic. So we want people who are coming through our program to know all the ins and outs of the technology that's available. So as a technique maybe becomes more clinically useful, you can say, well, I already have experience doing this kind of analysis. And the last is genomic data visualization and management. This course is one where we will start writing reports in the correct format to go to various stakeholders. We're really excited that we have a partnership with the University of California, San Diego Clinical Testing Lab. And I was down there talking to the director a few months ago, and he mentioned how they have a big backlog of variant reports to be uploaded to the national database. There's this database called ClinVar, where everyone who finds a clinically relevant variant is supposed to not just share that with the doctor, but also share it with the community, put it out there for other people to use that same analysis in case they come up with a patient with the same variant. But just because they are so busy with all of the testing they have to do, there's no one there to write up the reports and format them properly and get them on the internet. And so I said, well, that sounds like a great idea for our students to take part in. And so we will hopefully be able to do some real reports and then submit them to the NIH to be put online. And this course will be all about how do you manage data files, how do you put them into the format that complies with all the privacy laws, which are very important in the field to respect the patients, and really get you ready to work from day one, ready to go in your job. Okay, so the curriculum, I've mentioned it several times already, but the same hexagon at the top that you saw for the genetic counseling program, and that is the same genetics courses. So the background is going to be a lot of genetics and science so you can actually make a clinical interpretation. In the purple hexagon, we have the applied life science courses. The first one being Introduction to the Bioscience Industry. That's the flagship course here at the School of Applied Life Science to just talk about what it's like to work in this industry, what the expectations are, what the experience is like, and get people ready to be a great employee. We'll have the medical diagnostics. We're really excited about this course too. This is a class on how these testing panels get designed, because no matter what we teach you, now in 6 months there will be a new product that's just been approved, and you'll need to be able to understand it. So by understanding how new diagnostics are developed, that puts you in position to understand how the field is going to change over the next years. Of course, we'll do biostats and then ethics. And then we have this biomedical data systems and informatics, which is a course that will be taught in the programming language R, which is used by a lot of genomics programs, especially ones that are freeware. We also have a course for programming for the biosciences, and that will be taught in Python. And those are the two programming languages that everyone says are the most used in the field every time we ask a company. Now, the goal is not to teach you to be a programmer or a bioinformaticist, but it's really important that students who graduate are able to use all the tools that other people have developed. And if you get some sort of error, you're having a problem, you can articulate it to the person at your site who is the subject matter expert. Then back to the purple hexagon, we have the clinical trial design, which again is really important to understand how pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies start with this clinical trial process, because genomics is going to play a bigger and bigger role in that field too. And of course, we're in a school of pharmacy, so we'll have the pharmacogenomics course and precision medicine. In the summer, between your first and second year, every student will do an internship, and this internship will be at a single site, and I'll talk about those sites in just a moment. And then as we keep going around the circle, we have the specific courses, which I already talked about a little bit, the genomics lab, the programming class, and the variance analysis. And then in the second year, we also have 6 units, which is not that much, 2 to 3 classes, but we do have some emphasis pathways where you can select whichever courses are most interesting to you and more aligned with what you want to do with your degree, and that will follow up with a capstone. So the emphasis pathways were really developed after talking with our advisory board. So when we started this whole process, we were really focused on the first one on the left there, the clinical decision support. And the classes we selected for that were ones that are really based on understanding human disease. So the embryology and prenatal diagnosis course, or the microbiomics and pathogen genomics course, or molecular basis of disease. These are really for people who see their future role in variant curation and doing reports for medical professionals or working in a clinical lab. However, as I said, the clinical trial companies were also really excited. I could see a great, exciting career if you're more into perhaps like pharmacy design or drug design, rare diseases, something like that. We have a few courses that would really tailor the education to that industry. So business and science communication, introduction to the food and drug laws, pharmaceutical discovery and development. Those are 2 really signature courses of our School of Applied Life Science. And then the biotechnology-based therapeutics is another one where you learn about how the knowledge that we're acquiring about biology in the last few decades is really being put to use in design of new drugs. The last pathway is for people who are interested in assay development, making the next great genetic test. Melissa can answer the actual number, but I think there's something like 3,000 genetic tests now that can be ordered by a physician. And while whole genome sequencing is getting cheaper and is perhaps the future, it might just be too much data. There's still going to be a need and a role for the specific genetic testing panel. And so how do companies decide what they're going to test for? What are the best variants to put on these panels? What is a useful combination maybe of diseases to look at all at once? And so for people interested in developing better genetic tests and genomic tests, we have again the business and science communication and the food and drug law, because those go hand in hand with clinical trial development also. But then we have this other course for advanced in vitro diagnostics and device and diagnostic product development, along with some other choices. Of course, if you get to KGI and you look through the course catalog and there's another class at the School of Applied Life Sciences that really just is super interesting to you, we can always make a case-by-case basis, but we just put these groupings of electives together where you would choose 6 units from one of the pathways to really focus on an interest. And a lot of these interests you might develop during your internship. So we have lined up a lot of internships. As I was mentioned before, we've gotten such great response from our biotech and genomics industry partners. We probably have 3 times as many internship asks as we are going to have students, because every time we tell someone about the program, they're super excited and they want to have an intern. So these internships are going to be 10 to 12 weeks, full-time, so 400 hours, and they'll be the summer following your first year. And what we hope is that when you're in this experience, there will be the chance to continue the project the whole next school year as the capstone project. And the schedule has been set up then where you can work 1 day a week for that same site, either in person or remotely. And so you can really develop a full year-long project. And a lot of the companies are really excited about that too, because they don't just train you during the summer and then you go away as soon as classes start. They have an investment in your project and are going to get a deliverable out at the end. Whatever your capstone project is, they'll have something to show for their experience of mentoring you as a student. And we've lined up a lot of different sites. Some are in the genomics industry, so genetic testing companies, sequencing companies, ones that do assay development. We also have a lot of partnerships with clinical laboratories. So these are the labs that are actually seeing patient samples come from an affiliated hospital, doing the variant curation and then presenting it to the medical group. There's also lots of roles still in academic laboratories, either helping do research study design, research data analysis. A lot of major medical centers and universities have sequencing core facilities where they sequence projects either from the labs on site or from outside people can contract with them. And so there are always roles for doing this kind of analysis, not to take straight to the patient, but maybe to make some sort of scientific discovery that can then be applied to all patients in the future. And the last was the biotech industry, people who are doing pharmacogenomics, the people who are making the next great designer drug. California is the hotbed of all of this drug development, and so there are plenty of opportunities to work alongside people developing a clinical trial and help them with their genomics needs. And so this is, again, just how we've envisioned the program. We have that strong foundation of genetics knowledge. We have then the applied life science courses that really get you ready to work in a clinical or a industry site. Then we have the really focused courses on genomic data analytics and the summer experience to get some, not just an experience for helping to build your knowledge, but also to help build your professional resume, and then the electives and the capstone project. And so just to really bring it all together, we've been able to, we've had the opportunity, I should say, to really start from scratch and design this program to meet a need that's just so overwhelming in the industry. And we want to give you an education that's both foundational and practical. So you have the knowledge of genetics matched with the practical skills of actually doing data analysis to let that degree take you wherever it can take you. And with that, I will hand it back over to Jason.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fortini. We do have one question.
Okay.
Actually, a few came in. The first one is from Kevin, and he said, is a computer science coding background helpful for MSGDA and the careers that will be available after?
That is a great question. The answer is yes, it's helpful, but it is not required. So you can see that we only, because we're trying to get so much knowledge crammed into 2 years, we only have 2 courses that really focus on programming. One of them is the Introduction to Programming for the Biosciences, and the other is the Informatics class. If you come in with a strong coding background, that's just going to put you head and shoulders above everyone else who's vying for these jobs. You would hopefully be a great group member to work with, because we do a lot of team-based learning here at KGI, so I can see that you being a very popular person to work with. This is a good program. If you have a lot of programming experience and you want to break into the genomics industry, this would be a good program. But if you don't have the strongest skills, we're also going to teach people what they need. And so through the 2 courses, and also just in the genomics lab, and then later the variant curation class, we're going to expose everybody to the computer packages that you will see at various sites. And one great thing about KGI is because we know people at different companies, we have the inside track on exactly what products different companies are using to do their variant curation. What do they use? What's the back end of all the tools? Do they develop their own? Do they use things that have been published? And so we're going to make a very concerted effort to make sure no one gets left behind. But if you already come in with this background, it'll be a great combination for future job prospects.
Okay, and then the second and last question, is the MSGDA internship schedule presented here similar to that envisioned for the genetic counseling program?
So that is not similar. So we're going to be doing, well, similar in some ways, but Melissa can answer how the rotations are going to work for genetic counseling, but for MSGDA, it's going to be the whole summer. That's all you do in the summer, 400 hours. And then the next year, it's 1 day a week. I will say that we would love for you to continue at the same site, but if it's just not working out or it's not possible because you want to do your internship maybe on the East Coast with a company and then come back and they don't allow you to work remotely, we have other options for that capstone if you can't continue it for a year. But because of that, it's really trying to build one long-term, full 12 months affiliated with a company, which is a little different than genetic counseling where you do a set number of weeks at a variety of different sites as you try to accumulate cases in each particular subtype that's required to graduate from the genetic counseling program. I hope that answered that.